Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to the summer of the real. As you see, I am doing my summer walk, honoring Artemis, and what a summer has been. It's been pretty weird for me. I don't know about you, but here in northern Illinois, it's been this combination of sweltering hot days like now, or punishing thunderstorms. Just in June, we've had three tornado watches. Basically, that means tornadoes have landed in the area. Usually we get, I don't know, one a year, if that. So I don't know if the gods are angry or there's some intern at DARPA who's having some fun. But anyway, I got to be grateful, and I'm here to do a little 2-for-1 promotion. The first one is the video you will be watching or listening to now, and that is from the Finding Hermes group. I'm making it public, and in this one, we had the mighty Richard Smoley join the group, and he discussed his book, 7 Games of Life. And it's a very useful book, especially in these days when we need that gnosis. Then Richard gave us a teaser on Sophia, because he will be the first speaker at Astro Gnosis this year, and he's going to give us an amazing talk on Sophia. So very excited to have Richard on. The second promotion is, yes, Astro Gnosis. This year we have even more speakers, amazing speakers. We've sold more tickets, and we've got an amazing array of experiential sessions, if you would. We've got a meditation session. We've got 2 Sophianic exercises that are very Gnostic. We got I Ching readings, tarot readings. We got some consciousness altering surprises at the social events. And yeah, it's going to be even greater and bigger than the last 2. So I really hope to see you there. For those of you who are curious, the online tickets will be available soon. So you will be able to see or experience the entire Astro Gnosis, except for some of the rituals and exercises that might be held in other rooms or even outdoors. For those of you attending, I should remind you that you will also get a video replay of Astro Gnosis. So that's really it. Please join the Finding Hermes group. Again, 2 extra interactive, engaging meetings a month, plus other bonuses, and Astro Gnosis, August 9th and 10th at the Theosophical Society. Can't wait to see you, and can't wait to see what amazing revelations happen. So that's really it. I better get going with my Artemis walk, especially in this heat before I melt, and I hope you are enjoying your summer as well. Shine on, you crazy diamonds. Thank you. Welcome, everybody, to the Finding Hermes meeting, our spirituality practice and just general healing meeting once a month. Glad to see everybody here, and I hope everybody's having a great May and a great springtime. I hope Persephone is taking care of you, as she will if you summon her. So today is a special show, and it is always exciting in any platform, whether I meet them for lunch or whether we hang out, whether we do interviews, whether we just chat on Facebook or email. It is always a pleasure to connect with Richard Smoley. Richard, thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And as always, it's a pleasure to chat with you too.
And yes, we will be discussing a bit 2 topics today. One is Richard's latest book, which I really enjoyed, 7 Games of Life and How to Play. And we will also be discussing Richard's role at the Astro Gnosis, August 9th and 10th, and how he will be leading the way on Sophia. So Richard will tell us about the Gnostic Sophia. And if you have any questions here in the group about either the book or Sophia, our favorite heroine, or sometimes anti-hero, we will certainly get to your questions. Well, let's start with your book, Richard. Tell us a little bit about your book and how you brought it out from the Akashic record.
Well, the book is called 7 Games of Life and How to Play. And it's about the basic games of life. I don't mean chess or so on. You play 6 of these games. You always play them. You inevitably play them. You started the minute you were born, and you will end playing them the minute you die. You have no choice. And it's not because I said so. And these games are survival, love, power, pleasure, creativity, and courage. Everybody has to play these games. Everybody has to survive. Everybody needs love. Everyone needs love. Even the most broken sociopath needs love, maybe only in the form of an animal. We all have to assert our power. Even the weakest of us at some point has to stand up for himself. You have to be creative at some point in your life. You have to have a creative solution to something, even if it's, I don't know, finding your keys. So all of this you have to do. And that is, you could call it the game of life. The prologue talks a little bit about this game of life and suggests that it's really ultimately impossible to know the real object of this game while you were still immersed in it. Unlike any other game you can play. The object of the game of life, if you remember that one, is the old board game, was to end up on Millionaire Acres instead of the poor farm.
Right.
This may have an object. Do we know what it is? Maybe we do. Lots of people say they do, but there are reasons for not thinking, they have any greater an idea of the picture than we do. Sorry, I have this bronchial thing.
Oh, that's okay. I'll take it out when I go.
Oh, yeah, okay. You can do that. The 7th game is not obligatory. In fact, not many people play it. But you might start playing it if you start wondering about some of the questions I just brought up. What is all of this about? Somehow the bumper sticker, which is of course ironic, is taken literally wrong in saying he who dies with the most toys wins. And everything else kind of, really? So the game that is at least trying to look into the reasons why we're here and see it a little bit more deeply is called The Master Game. Now, I took this title from an old book by Robert DeRott, which was published in the 60s, which was called The Master Game, and which discusses these things. I think it's still, in many ways, a good book, but I'm approaching it from a different angle, and as every author is going to do. So The Master Game is like, why exactly are we here? What is this about? And it relates a little bit to Gurdjieff's theme of the sleep of waking life. Everybody goes around in the stupor. Think of the times that you have looked for a household object that you just set down a minute or two ago. Well, were you conscious when you put it down? No. And of course, why did you go into this room? Why did I go into this room? All of us do this, and these are symptoms of our what has been called our waking sleep. Now, I want to say right here that I have no intention of blaming the smartphone or any such contrivance for this. You may argue that the smartphone makes all this worse, but there's a lot of rhetoric out there saying it's all the smartphones. No, people were exactly like this before the smartphone. If you are walking into traffic because of your smartphone, it's merely an accentuation of the way we all were before any of this was started. So you can't really blame the smartphone. Um, so what is this kind of disconnection? What are we connecting to? What have we become disconnected from? Is an ultimate answer possible? No, I don't really think so. But I think we can kind of get closer to a wider picture and understand a little more if we look at this Astro game.
Yeah, indeed, and yeah, I have to agree. One of the things that my kids love is when I do the classic, I'll walk into a room and then walk out and say, I forgot what I was going into that room for. And they just like, they're not there yet. They're not as fragmented. So they think they think it's funny, daddy losing his mind. And like you said, Richard, I thought it was both chilling and comforting when you talked about Gurdjieff walking around the streets of some town in Russia, early 20th century, and him going, man, everybody's disconnected. Nobody's present. Everybody's on some automatic program. And like you said, nobody was walking around with their iPhones or their tablets or looking at billboards. So this is a universal human condition that basically says we are not awake. That's the game, right? To awaken, and who knows what's on the other side? Because, like you said, your book is not meant to be learned. It's an experience, a
Mm-hmm.
mischievous experience at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was Uspensky who made that
Oh,
observation. But the point is the same. Well, is this correct? I don't know. Do you think this is correct? Well, check it out for yourself. Next time you're in a public space, a mall, a city street, a subway or a train, just look around. How awake do people seem? This has one little requirement on your part, which is that you have to be a little bit awake even to remember to do this. And many times, there are many exercises where you have these practices of remembering something. The Gurdjieff work is particularly known for this. Like to be conscious of yourself, say every time you touch a doorknob. And this is an exercise. If you try it, you'll soon find that most of the time you'll fail. Of course, it's a matter of practice. But, well, to explain why, in some terms, I think the Gurdjieffian answer is, well, very forceful in explaining some of this. There's the old tripartite division of the human being into mind, emotions, and body. And these three centers are not very well connected to each other. Is the mind aware of what the emotions are doing? Sometimes, particularly this was, back in the 80s when, kind of was doing those human potential things. A therapist would ask a group, what are you feeling right now? And people would say, well, I think. No. We're not asking what you think. We're asking what you feel. And people often found it very difficult to go past this thought narrative and even know what they were emotionally feeling in that moment, even if it was, basically nothing. And that is only one example of the disconnection. And part of the master game is at least to foster some better interconnection between all of these parts. I'm giving you a very simplistic picture, of course, but that's a big part of it. If all three parts of you are engaged in something, well, you are much more awake. You are more conscious. So that is, again, part of the master game.
Yeah, and for you guys, he does offer yeah, simple exercises to be in the moment. I love this quote from your book, Richard. You write, "At some point, players of the master game will realize that the self, capital S, the unseen knower, is ultimately identical in all of us. If at our core we are constituted of what has been called, quote, the I that is we, it follows that the game cannot ultimately be played for ourselves alone." So that's sort of, yeah, I mean, as you would say, the more conscious you are, the more kinder you are. The whole bodhisattva thing, you know, it's that mistake people always make, thinking that the Gnostics just wanted to escape the world, when in reality they wanted to come back and help others, awaken others, heal others.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's very true. And I think morality, ethical behavior, is really the center point of any spiritual path that really deserves the name. If people, ask sometimes what Christianity is, and my answer would be follow the Sermon on the Mount and take or leave the rest as you like. It's Christianity, so I guess you have some commitment to following the teachings of Christ. All this other stuff, all this these doctrines, these redemptions, atonements, theologies are discretionary. Of course, nobody wants you to know that because they're all selling these packages of doctrine and so on. But the other aspect about morality is, there's, as you all learned in your psychology class in college, there's Kohlberg's categories of moral development. It goes from the very basic, at a very primitive level, people behave because they're afraid of the policeman. Of course, the policeman isn't always looking. So then there had to be this policeman installed in our heads called God. So God is always looking over your head, which makes people behave a little better. Even this is not very advanced. People finally, according to Kohlberg, reach this level where they're good for, truly transcendent um, um, values. But I would go a little bit further, and I do say this in the book. All that is the case, but I think if you are at a certain level of evolution, uh, the reason you behave in a good and decent way is that it's just repellent to you to act otherwise. It's just like something, the idea just disgusts you. I was thinking about doing that, about like that just this morning. I can't remember exactly what it was. That would just be disgusting. That'd just be, and at this point, moral precepts really start to recede into the background because, as I do say in the book, nobody's forbidden to eat glass, right? Why would nobody, what? There's no law against eating glass because who the hell would eat glass? Even if you want to kill yourself, there are much less painful ways of doing it. So there are a lot of things that you just don't do because they're organically repellent. And I think once one achieves a certain level of awakening, that becomes true with moral behavior. This is like, this is awful. I just, ugh. So I think that's, everybody knows Kohlberg's categories. I think this is kind of above even the top one. You're just organically disgusted by doing things that are evil or bad or harmful or cruel.
Oh yeah, agreed. And looking at some of your points, obviously one of your games is courage, and in the show we talked a lot about overcoming fear. The old Frank Herbert dictum: "Fear is the mind killer." And as a collective, fear has been ruling this society almost with an iron fist this last few years, or even longer. What advice do you have? I like how you bring in Stonewall Jackson, of all people. And I think the lesson is that he was a Presbyterian, And so he was believed in determinism, that, what's going to happen, it's already God's will. What's the point? You just, do what you got to do. And of course, many societies that show a lot of bravery, the Vikings, the Japanese, even some times in Islam, it's because it's already been ordained by Allah, the time of your death. So it's up to you just to show up and do the best you can. But I don't know if that works for us, that no free will makes us, well, it does makes us less afraid, right?
Well, I mean, I put Stonewall Jackson there because I found him a fascinating example. Yeah, he was a man of courage because, there are bullets whizzing around, and he seemed to just kind of enjoy it. The Lord would protect him, and this worked exactly up to the point where it didn't. Um, but my feeling about it, well, I studied A Course in Miracles for a long time, and which has many affinities with the Gnostic tradition. And the primordial fear is the fear of God, the fear of wanting to be separate from God and yet being terrified by it. And this sends people into, all of us, into this shock, this shock of oblivion, out of which the world we know it is born. And this world in which we live, is very much composed of love and fear, or good and evil, if you like. So overcoming fear in the long run is kind of overcoming this sense of the world in which I'm always in danger. Now, if this all sounds rather abstract and religious, to put it in more practical terms, we go through life with all sorts of fears that are utterly nonsensical. And it's kind of taken, well, what about what this? Well, a lot of it isn't going to happen. And whether it's a matter of reassurance or not, the things that happen somehow weren't the things you were afraid of, which ought to give us kind of a lesson somewhere. Now, of course, there's a need to distinguish between kind of animal fear, the fear of standing, fear of heights, which apparently is built into the human mind, fear of a predator, that kind of thing, which is, shall we say, a more organic fear, which is this organic fear is natural, but it's also quite short-lived. You're afraid of these crooks. Get out. Ideally, once you get out of their hair, you shouldn't be afraid anymore. Or that's a hard one. Let's say you just had a near miss on a motor accident, which I bet you all of you like me have had. There's a moment of terror. You're kind of a little shaken, but you're not afraid of it anymore. Like 5 minutes later, that was a lucky break. That kind of organic fear is, we can say useful to survive, but the kind of fear that is kind of all pervasive, what's going to happen next? If you're not worried about yourself, you can start worried about our planet, our country. As you all know, the opportunity for fears, anxieties, worries, and neuroses in this direction are delightfully numerous.
That is indeed. Well, what about love? And I know I just quoted Heart. And let's not get into an argument which was the better Heart, late 70s Dreamboat Annie or Hairspray Heart of the 80s. Let's talk about love. And I like how there's so many good stuff that you quote, Richard. For example, you quote, where is it? You quote Jung, who talked about he conducted a study on the astrological charts of married couples and found that the percentage of couples with these and similar aspects was higher compared to other aspects. And eventually, so of course, it tells it that these things are in the stars, and that's a good thing. And I also like too, Richard, you write that the ultimate secret of the game of love is perceiving the unity of all beings. So is that what love should be? Or like your book, Conscious Love, we just have to be aware of the different levels and categories of love?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is, and this was the point of my book, Conscious Love, it's really important to know what kind of love we're talking about. Practically everything that we call love is highly transactional. We invited them, they invited us, we invited them, they invited us. We're going to send them a Christmas card this year. Well, they didn't send one to us last year. And practically all of human relationships are compounded on this basis. Marital love, well, there are a lot of people who've cheated on their spouses only once and found that it ruined things forever, rightly or wrongly. Why? Because there was a transaction. You're going to be sexually loyal to me. I'm going to be sexually loyal to you. Well, you broke that. So, well, all hell can break loose. So there's nothing, friendship, similarly. Even love for a child is transaction. In kind of a primitive sense, you at least may have some expectations your child will take care of you in old age. But even short of that, there are very, very few parents who don't load up their children with expectations of one kind or another. Some of them positive, like, no, you really have to get into MIT. Some of them are negative. We've been losers and jailbirds for generations, so you're going to be a loser and a jailbird too. But again, their expectations and a certain set trends transactional. Now, there is this unconditional non-transactional love, which is what you were alluding to. And it is not false. And it's not to be dismissed cynically, but it's important to be clear that most of the things that call themselves love are not that. And that moment of kind of unconditional love, general warmth and kindness does occur to people, rarely, sporadically, or commonly, depending on the kind of person. You could say that's unconditional love, but it is qualitatively different from everything else. So, I think that's kind of important point about it. Yeah, I do think astrological types are of value choosing a partner. I mean, my own impression is that sun sign compatibility is a big help. And that means, like, all planets are in 4 elements: fire, water, earth, air. Your planet is in one of them. And a complementary element, that is to say, another of your same elements, if you're a water sign like Cancer or Scorpio, you're more likely to be compatible with another water sign, or an earth sign. So you're less likely to be compatible in the long run with air and fire signs. And the same is true for the air and fire sign. So this gives you, this is not universally applicable, but I've been surprised at how often it's been true. Yeah, I think that's kind of correct. What Jung is talking about is the classic astrological conjunction. And this goes back to him, and this is what he was testing, where the man's sun or ascendant is conjunct the woman's moon. That is the classic sign of marital. As a matter of fact, it's the case with me. Actually, my ascendant is conjunct with my wife's moon, and her ascendant is conjunct with my moon. So yeah, 16 years, Oh, we made it. I had an aunt who used to say, "You're a good person, Richard, up to now."
Up to now.
Really, no one could say anything better for themselves. But anyway,
Exactly, exactly. Well, now I want to bring you guys in the audience here. Do you have any questions for Richard or
I
on
did see
his
one in
book
the
or the
chat.
con?
I did see one in the chat
What was that?
about loving animals.
Yeah, I think yeah, Anon is talking about loving animals, but we still eat them. Yeah.
Well,
Stay away from humans.
hey, don't we say, "I love you so much I could eat you"?
Yeah.
That's not as flip a response as it may seem, because hey, the lion loves the lamb so much that it wants to make the lamb a part of it. Think about that.
Mhm.
In terms of the animal thing, um, well, whatever you're going to eat, you're going to end up killing something. And I personally am not sympathetic to vegetarianism, uh, as a blanket rule, partly because I know very few vegetarians who are not at some level or another rather moralistic, are self-congratulatory. I'm one and you should be one too. Or I'm superior to you because, oh, you still eat animals? And that kind of inner arrogance, I think, kind of obliterates any kind of moral high ground vegetarian can occupy. I mean, you can make a choice. Okay, and yes, I know all about the issues, pro and con, uh, um, and if you feel differently about them, by all means, do so. I would get be careful about self righteousness. Um, I saw this. What was his name? Jimmy Carr, comedian on Netflix, and I watched his routine a week or so ago, and he said, he said to the audience, "My wife is vegan, but you already know that because she must have told you." And there's some truth to that. So yeah, and there are moral issues, but I think minimally, let's actually focus on human being decent to one another as human beings. I certainly believe in humane treatment of animals and so on, but we haven't gotten that far in being humane to human beings that we uh, need to make the task more difficult.
Richard, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Yeah. My name is John Munter. I should have worn my Marianne Williamson 2024 shirt today. But my very favorite quote in terms of fear is from Calvin Coolidge. Chances are I've seen 10 troubles coming down the road at you. Chances are 9 will run in the ditch before they get to you.
Exactly.
I was wondering, my question basically is, do you consider that there are individual programs that people come in on, like they're coming in to work on bravery, to express or not express it, or love, or tenderness, or something of that sort? Some quality, some platonic quality of soul.
Yeah, I think so. And this is generally shown in what people have to face in life. What you need to learn is what life presents you. Um, it's not all that much of an exaggeration to say that you create the world around you, um, because cognitively that's true, and that's a deep subject that we can get into. But yeah, people are definitely seem to be working on things. I went to a reunion and this weekend, and a classmate gave me a little book about men in grief, in which he had published an essay about his own experiences, and it was just this whole string of his griefs that he experienced, ranging from the death of his father when he was 10 to the suicide of his sister 3 years before. So I could say that he must have had some kind of, I don't know, signed some prenatal contract to deal with grief. Astrologers will say, well, I can see that in your chart. And more often than not, they can see at least something. But yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Of course, it's one of those things until you don't know, and you don't know exactly what it is until you've gone through it. And you're right, Calvin Coolidge is right, and the one thing of those 10 that does come down the road and probably ends up not being as bad as you thought. Now, of course, life being what it is, something else was coming down the road that you weren't worried about, but that's part of it. A subsidiary point is that your fears are not protecting you. This kind of blanket fear of anything and anything that might happen is not a defense, it's a weakness. It makes you more prone to problems. It makes you more vulnerable, even to exploitation. So being aware of this and watching it and seeing, well, how much of this is really justified is, I think, a useful thing. I mean, let's take the example of money. Most people worry about money, and they think, oh, someone with $70,000 a year thinks if I only had $100,000 a year, everything would be great. Well, they end up making $100,000 a year, and they're still worried about money. But if I had $125,000 a year, then it would be great. I would have no more worries. Well, this doesn't really happen for many reasons. But part of it is that the human mind is conditioned to go from one fear to the other. And this is, you could even say, an integral part of the sleep of man.
So, Richard, I've got survival, love, power, and courage. What were the others?
Creativity and pleasure. And people play those games very differently. I mean, we all have to have some pleasure in life. There, some people who are rich enough so that they can focus on it almost exclusively. And not always in a bad way. They may become great lovers and patrons of the arts. Most of the great art that we know and love was paid for by some really, really rich person who had the money to do it and took enough pleasure in beauty that he did. I mean, it's frankly a little surprising that our mega wealthy people today are so impervious to this impulse, but I'm not going to get into social criticism here. Simply in creativity. Everybody, I think, and I did say this in the book, I think it's a good idea for everybody to be good at something, like really good at something. It may be bone surgery, it may be candle dipping, it may be gardening. But I even put it this way: achieving mastery in something is very, very valuable. What are you going to achieve it in? Well, the thing you like doing the best. I think it's possible to achieve mastery in doing something you hate, but it's going to end up resulting in bitter unhappiness. But do something be very good at doing something that you love. And I mean a form of active work. I mean, excellence at watching TV is really not kind of what I had in mind. But, that kind of knowing how to do something that well is valuable. In fact, Gurdjieff said, if a man knows how to do one thing well, then you can talk to him. And I do think that's the case. I really do. Again, what that one thing is could be gluing seashells to cardboard. I don't know. Anyway.
What did you think of Eric Burns' work? Speaking of the 1960s, you know Eric Burns?
I did. Yeah, I like it. I mean, Eric Byrne wrote this book called Games People Play, turned into a hit song by Mac Davis. And it's called Transactional Analysis.
Yeah.
And the idea is that there are three kind of parts in you: parent, adult, child, right? And all interaction is who is talking to who. An adult talking to an adult interacts one way. Parent talking to a child is talking another way. Child talking to a parent. And the thing is that, you know, sometimes we're talking to our friends the way a parent would talk to a child. And this may lead to, shall we say, unhappiness in relationships. So transactional analysis is basically sorting through, well, what kind of person am I being here? He has even a whole array of games on this. The only one of which I can remember is "Now I've Got You, You Son of a Bitch." But I thought it was very useful. I thought it was very adroit and helpful.
A friend of mine, well, a friend of a friend, went to one of the transactional groups, and he said, "Hey, you ought to sit in for a while." So for about 2.5 months or so, I sat in on a group. It was very interesting. His book, Games People Play, was good for general audience, but his real informative book was Transactional Analysis, analyzing the transactional of people between people to see. What brought that up was the position you have of power, who has power. Mm-hmm.
Very, and you know, power is one of the games of my games. You know, one of my 7 games. Again, everybody plays it. You know, an infant squalling in the crib is exercising power, and an infant's cries are very, very powerful. They're meant to be. They're also meant to be annoying because it's really necessary for the infant to have whatever it needs at that moment. That's an exercise of power. Of course, there are many other kinds of power. The higher you get in this realm, the more important is the power of influence, which is not the power of direct command, but the power to command respect and therefore compliance. All right, let's take an example of the power of influence. Let's take an example of the power of influence. Greta Thunberg, you know, this probably kind of neurotic Swedish teenager who has nonetheless, you know, galvanized world attention toward the problems of climate change. Oh, I heard a good joke. Did you know that a decree went out from Greta Thunberg? By 2030, all guitars will have to be electric.
Lord have mercy.
I mean, you know, I'm not sneering at her or her goals, but I'm saying, you know, she's amassed an enormous amount of influence, you know, without the wealth, power, status, whatever government she's elected. I don't think she's even written a book. So that is power on an enormous scale. Oh, by the way, did you notice that people can exert the power of influence for extraordinarily good and for extraordinarily bad ways? Well, as probably already noticed, yes, they can.
Yeah, we are witnessing the madness of the crowds.
Yeah. And this is a very interesting subject. And I really don't think that psychology, even conventional psychology, is going to advance until it understands crowd and mass psychology much better than it does. Now, I'm trying to think of the name of the Russian um, psychologist in the 20s who studied it.
Um,
I'll think of it in a minute. But he lived through the Russian Revolution, and he saw crowds. A crowd in 1 second could turn from a mass of people into a violent mob. And I mean, his theory about this was that even there may have been some kind of electrical impulse that jumped from brain to brain. I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but at least he tried to make sense of it. The book is called Collective Reflexology, and the name will come to me. But yeah, the madness of crowds. We don't understand the psychology of crowds, how people can behave like how an individual can behave in an insane way and then go home and be a normal, decent person. And I think the most famous or one famous instance of that is in To Kill a Mockingbird, where Atticus is guarding this black guy in jail. Atticus is sitting at the jail door, in a rocking chair because he knows a mob is going to come to lynch him. And the mob isn't looking too friendly, but the daughter shows up, and of course he wants her to get the hell out of there. But she sees a guy in the foyer. Oh, hi, Mister. I go to school with your son Jeff. And the guy kind of looks down, and kind of, instead of becoming a member of the mob, he realizes he's a human being. And everybody in the mob has the same realization, and they just kind of peel off. So the point is that her reminding these people of human was far more powerful than anything Atticus could have. In any case, I think that's a remarkably unstudied area. I mean, sociology does tend to deal with it, but not in the sense of collective psychology. I think that's a great mystery, and I think if psychology is going to progress, it's going to have to look much more into that, and have much more answers about
that. I think that crowds cannot be dealt with directly. They can be herded like sheep, like the animals, to go here or there, leading from behind, this kind of a thing. But you have to get to them on an individual basis. There was quite a few years ago, there was a meeting of socialists downtown Portland, and I was standing outside of the goings-on, talking with a friend, and there was a fellow standing with this great big sign. So I walked into the middle there, and I started talking to this fella, and he didn't seem to know what was going on. So I explained to him what was going on and what was really happening there. And after talking to him for about 10 minutes or so, he took off this big old sign, put it down, and walked away.
What did the sign say?
Oh, it was, I don't know, I don't remember, but it was a big old sign. Anyway, after him understanding what was really transpiring there, he said, no, this is not for me. So you have to reach people on an individual basis where the crowds can only be herded that way.
Well, we better talk a little bit about Sophia as time is pressing. Richard will be at Astro Gnosis 3 this August 9th and 10th. He will lead on the Gnostic Sophia, and then we'll have a day of discussion about Sophia, and then we'll talk about simulated realities, because after all, if there is a cause for our simulated reality, Sophia is definitely a big influence. So, Richard, if somebody had to ask you, who is the Gnostic Sophia, is there any short answer? Or maybe, I don't know. I know your book, Inner Forbidden Faith, is one of my favorite because it's such a historical overview of Gnostic thought. And of course, the big one is that once Christianity got rid of the divine feminine, it was kind of hobbled out of the gate. Even modern movements, you're talking even A Course in Miracles, Gurdjieff, even modern Gnostic movements kind of tiptoe around or don't include the divine feminine.
Well, just to deal with that subject shortly, I think that the absolute, the divine, can be visualized in masculine terms, feminine terms, hermaphroditic terms, or any other. These all have a certain legitimacy as long as you do not mistake them for the absolute itself. Yes, people have trouble with a father god because their father was a drunk who kicked them down the stairs every night. So it's easier for them to envisage God as a mother. Well, great, more power to them. So, that. So I don't really even see that much of an argument there. I just want to just address that issue very briefly. Sophia, means wisdom. Sophia is, in my opinion, the principle of consciousness. And consciousness essentially involves the relation of self to other. And an esotericist would say that this is the case at all levels and all degrees. Edison, in an 1890 interview, said, all of these atoms and molecules that interact with each other, do you mean to tell me they do so without some sort of intelligence? And I think he was grasping that point. But let's look at it in purely human terms. You have conscious experiencing I, which itself has no characteristics. All it does is experience. It has these experiences, whether it's a dream, a bad dream, the image of someone you're sexually attracted to, an insane, murderous tyrant, and you somehow become identified with this image. You kind of become what you behold. Now, the Greek myth that applies to this is Narcissus. He sees his own reflection in a mirror, he falls in and drowns. In terms of Sophia, and this is true, even on a moment-by-moment basis, your consciousness is identified with what you experience. You can't detach it through meditative experience, and that's what meditation is, I believe, maybe even largely about. But you think you are what you're experiencing. This is the fall of Sophia into the world. You think you are the world. And it's put in feminine terms. I don't know if you want my opinion. It's put in feminine terms because the Greek word Sophia is feminine. I would say it's actually the same as the Logos. Well, why aren't they the same? Well, the Logos is masculine, Sophia is feminine. So I guess one must be a boy and the other must be a girl, which, as you can see, is entirely inept and irrelevant. This principle of consciousness exists in all of us. And any gender discussion beyond a very, very basic level is really just going to take you off the point. But this is it. The Virgin Sophia is consciousness in its pure form. The fallen Sophia is the Sophia who's identified with her world, viewed through certain mental constructs, which I identify with the archons. And you really can't experience anything outside of these mental constructs, where it's very difficult to do so. Now, let me put this in scientific terms. There's a cognitive scientist at UC Irvine named Donald Hoffman wrote a book called The Case Against Reality.
Good book.
Obviously, some of you are familiar with it. And his thing was basically, we do not perceive the world as it is, or even close to what it is. We have our senses have evolved in a finely honed way to focus on what will preserve us or at any rate keep us from destruction. We filter out everything else. And these constructs are our limits. Now, Kant said the same thing in very different language. but there are these mental constructs by which we understand the world. And they have their value, but we take them for absolutes. And this is the fall of Sophia. The ultimate result is this demiurge, who's I identify with the ego, of Course in Miracles, this separate I that thinks that it's alone in the world, and it's created its world, which it has. It has created a world of fear, but it's a false world. And the liberation of Sophia is the inverse, the detachment of consciousness from its contents and the ability to see, yeah, this is going on, but this is not me. I mean, if you want to make this really hard, you have a whole stream of political, spiritual, religious opinions. So do I, so does everybody. I don't want to know what they are, please. But it's almost universal to think I am this identity as a Republican, Democrat, vegetarian, Buddhist, whatever, and getting mad at it. Well, no, not really. These are merely assimilated identities, and there's something beyond it that is, as I think the Gnostics would say, enslaved by the belief that it is these things. So I would say that is what Sophia is, and so it is the human predicament. And as I've already suggested, I think it's very importantly a cognitive predicament. And I think one major difference between the Gnostics and the conventional Christians was that they viewed the fundamental human problem as a cognitive one rather than as a moral one. So the problem is not sin, which itself is just another artifact. And of course, we could talk about that for a long time. The problem is not sin, but, as the Eastern traditions say much more explicitly, ignorance, or as I would rather put it, obliviousness. So that, I think, is the essence of what the Sophia myth is pushing us toward.
Well said indeed. Well, any questions from you guys? I don't want to take up. I always have a lot of questions, but
yeah, Richard, I had another comment on Sophia. My reading of the Gospel of Thomas is it's essentially non-dual. You see in saying 3, the kingdom of God is both within and without, meaning that, say, Sophia or wisdom or the Holy Spirit penetrates creation as well, even though you see the demiurge and you see archons in the Gospel of Thomas as well. But it seems to me that Marianne Williamson is kind of a Sophia type of this age. In A Course in Miracles, you have the antidote to fear is love, and she kind of suggests that this is a psychological training manual type of thing. Yet in her book, I just got her book, The Mystic Jesus, and was reading it, and she does have a real consciousness of the miraculous as well in there, and that's kind of my overall question to you. She has a story where back when she was in her 20s, she had this nervous breakdown, and her mother told her to see a psychiatrist, and it has to be a Jewish psychiatrist. So she went to see this Jewish psychiatrist. He says, well, this is not going to work out very good because I'm taking the Course in Miracles, and if you're not really consistent with this, it's not going to work out, and blah, 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 And the Jewish psychiatrist says, well, yeah, I just finished the workbook myself, Wow. I mean, if that's not a miracle, I don't know what is, So I'm just wondering about your sense of the miraculous in life as well.
Well, Marianne Williamson is the butt of a lot of jokes, deservedly or not. But she and I spoke at the same event some years ago, and she is teaching A Course in Miracles, and I believe she's teaching it accurately and effectively. I think she has studied a long time, and what she says about it and from it is true. I mean, I wrote a book myself about A Course in Miracles called The Theology of Love, and which the first half has many Gnostic echoes. The second part is basically talking about A Course in Miracles, which is really the only, believe it or not, logical, consistent Christian theology ever to be formulated. If you go with its premises, everything follows logically. All other Christian theologies are irrational or stupid or even crazy. God so loved the world that he damned everybody to hell, except he sort of felt bad about it. And he sent his son down here and had him tortured to death, and that somehow made it okay. Yeah, you laugh.
Exactly.
This is just a nasty description of what you're supposed to believe as a Christian, which of course makes no sense. So I think the Course in Miracles is a very powerful tool. I've studied it myself for 43 years. I have the highest respect for it. I consider it the greatest spiritual text of the 20th century. And I haven't read much at all of Marianne Williamson's work, so I don't know how it jives with that, but just from hearing her, yeah, she understands it. She teaches well. She teaches it well. That's all I really have to say about that.
All right. Any other questions?
You have one. Actually, I have many, but I'll just stick to one.
Give us a couple.
You mentioned early on something about a fear of God, and it seemed to me that you were talking about a fear of God as some sort of force towards incarnation. And I wasn't sure if I understood your point, but could you speak more on that? I find that very curious. And which God are you talking about? The true one or the false one?
The true one. Now, that is essentially what I'm going to say is a digest in very sketchy terms of The Course in Miracles.
Okay.
We are all the Son of God, right? We are all the Son of God. And there's only one Son. That is to say, the I that is in me is identical to the I that's in everyone else. That's why I could write that. Well, the Son of God, for reasons that are obscure because they're really not even really explicable in ordinary terms, in a sense, decided, well, what would it be like to be separated from God? And which, of course, in Miracles calls a tiny bad idea, at which the Son of God forgot not to laugh, or more clearly, did not forget to laugh. Did not remember to laugh at any. And this engendered such fear that it led to what was called the ego, which I would link very closely to the Gnostic demiurge, which suddenly thinks of itself as all alone, isolated, and imagining that God is mad at it for its rebellion. So it projects this world of fears and imagines everything or everyone is an enemy. And its love is, in case you hadn't heard me earlier, basically solely transactional. And so that is kind of the fear of God that I was talking about. Is this a justified fear? No, it's totally imagined. God does not even know, strictly speaking, of this rebellion, because if God knew of it, it would be true. So the Course in Miracles says, well, God doesn't know of this. What good does that do? So there is this principle that's kind of a mediating, reconciling principle called the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is kind of aware of God, and it does call the Father. It does use that gender language. and the fallen sun, and is able, if the sun calls upon it, to move toward healing, forgiveness, and what the Course ultimately calls atonement. That is to say, the final reunification of this severed being, which in the esoteric Christian tradition is called Adam, and it's in its restored form, it's called Christ. For as in Adam all men die, so in Christ all are made alive. So that's about as much as I can give in a brief space.
Thank you. And since you sort of touched on another of my questions, I might as well bring it up. You're speaking of love, and you're talking about it manifesting as transactional. But wouldn't you say, and do you agree or disagree that it's not love itself that's transactional? It's that we find transactions as a sort of medium. We use these transactions as a medium for love, but love itself transcends those transactions.
Well, the problem here is a verbal one. And the most obvious fact is that we use the word love in English to describe an enormous number of emotions, ranging from the highest, purest altruistic sentiment to plain old lust. And because that's the case, love is applied to all of these things. So what sense are you using it in? Very often, someone may be using it in one sense, and the other person may be understanding it in quite another. As I say, this is transactional, and within human interactions, it's natural. But there is the big mistake is to pretend that something that's quite transactional is unconditional. And this calls all sorts of harm, mishap. I would imagine a great deal of family dramas and hatreds are a consequence of this mistake.
All right. Well, unless somebody has a burning question, we probably should wrap it up since we are a little over an hour. So I thought this was a great. Thank you guys for coming here. There will be a replay later on today and catch it. And then later on, we'll make it public. Parts of it to promote the Astro Gnosis conference. And it will be a good one. There's going to be a lot on Sophia. The speaker list is still just coming together really nice. I've already added like 2 workshops, and the best part of these workshops are going to be mystical workshops to connect with Sophia. She will be the central point from people that do the work in sort of a modern Gnostic way. So, Richard, as always, thank you very much for coming on and interacting in these Gnostic circles.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed the questions. You're obviously a very sharp crowd. So I look forward to seeing some of you in August.
Likewise.
Thanks a lot, Richard. It was really great.
Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, you too.
All right,
Thank you. Enjoyed that. Bye-bye now.
Bye.